Hey guys, Marcus Melnick here with Firearm Mentor. Hope you're enjoying my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. These little things are free to you and really help the channel. I appreciate your support. Enjoy. Thank you.
The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick with Firearm Mentor and Stress 2 Logic, and it is in the middle of summer, which means it is vacation time and travel time. And we are very fortunate to have Rick Rosenfeld on the line. He is much more worldly than I am, and he is an international travel expert. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marcus. Good to be here with you.
Really appreciate it. I know Rick through the Northbrook Chamber of Commerce, and we've interacted over the past couple of years, and just something hit me at the last meeting when you were talking about one of your exotic vacations that you booked for a client, and I'm like, well, you know something? I get these State Department travel advisories, and when I worked in law enforcement, I used to get terrorism advisories, which were very similar. So I figured I'd want to invite Rick on the show and talk about how to be safe when traveling. Well, it's really specifically internationally, but these things also apply domestically as well. Rick, can you tell everyone what is your personal origin story? How did you get to be where you are today? What's your background? How did you get involved in the travel business?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I moved out to the Chicago area for university. I went to Northwestern, met my wife there, and got married. We both decided to stay here. She's from Ohio. Decided to disappoint both families and stayed here locally in the Chicago area. I never traveled internationally other than like a quick family trip to Aruba when I was a teen, before college or even during college. But my first job out of school, I ended up at Rotary International, which is the world headquarters of all the Rotary clubs around the world, and it's in downtown Evanston, literally about a 5-minute walk from Northwestern's campus. So I ended up working there, and through my time there, I actually really fell in love with the world. I got to travel internationally for business. I got to travel, me and my wife got to travel personally for holiday, and it really informed really the rest of my life and my career. After I left Rotary after 8 years, I took a sidestep into management consulting, but that wasn't so inspiring for me. So I ended up starting a travel company from scratch, happy for any $2 rental car commission I could get, but fairly quickly fell into a niche with business school travel because that was partly my background. So I formed a company called Travel MBA in 2009. I ran that for 10 years, growing it first logically, started working with Northwestern's business school, and then through word of mouth, that led to University of Chicago, to Duke, University of North Carolina, Harvard, Yale, Texas. I ended up within 10 years working with most of the top tier business schools. So I sold my company to a larger organization in 2009, stayed on with them for 7 years, and was able to do things with that larger combined company that I would never have been able to do as a small company. We grew more destinations, helping service, sending student groups to more than 100 countries around the world, identifying partners in those 100 countries to make sure that our clients could travel safe. And during that period, I became the VP of risk management for that larger company. So I had a lot of experience looking at international safety, international risk management, crisis management, and the like. I did figure my time in the travel industry was done in 2016. I took another sidestep running an international nonprofit working with Israeli and Palestinian teens, bringing them to the United States to meet the enemy for the first time. That was based out of suburban Glenview here in the Chicago area. And then the pandemic hit and sat on the sidelines for a year figuring out what I wanted to do next. And the gravitational pull of the travel industry just brought me right back in, and I decided to start a new travel company, focused more on the types of travel that I like to do and like to help people with, which was upscale individual travel to ideally more exotic destinations. So that's what I've been doing since the pandemic, growing that, reigniting the relationship with my partners in so many different countries, which was just a wonderful experience to get back in touch with them. So that takes us up to today.
That's terrific. You know, it's very interesting. There's a lot to unpack, and I've got follow-ups for you. People tend to gravitate towards other people who are like-minded, similar outlooks, and I'm thoroughly impressed with your Northwestern education because that was one of my schools as well. Although mine was a management certificate program, not a degree. My degrees are from Loyola, but the fact that you did risk management and the fact that you worked for Rotary really piques my interest. I'm going to dive into the Rotary thing.
Sure.
What years were you there?
So I worked at Rotary headquarters from 1988 through the end of 1994.
And the other thing is I worked for the Evanston Police Department, and on Tuesdays they had Luminati's Pizza right around the corner at the cafeteria. So I spent a lot of time in the Rotary building.
So we're still on the side. When did you work for Evanston Police Department?
2013 to 14.
Okay, yeah, I knew one of the commanders way back in the 80s and 90s, but he would have been long gone by the time you were.
You never know, though. Who was it?
Yeah, his name was Kip McMillan, and he ended up relocating to Jackson Hole after he retired.
All right, I do not know him, but you never know. It's a small world. In unpacking what you had said, your wife didn't go to Ohio State, the Ohio State?
Nope, we both ended up finding our way to the Midwest and ended up in the same dorm, and that's how we began our courtship through college. And
that's terrific.
Married about a week after her graduation.
Okay, awesome. Can you expand on your charity work that you did in Israel with bringing Israeli and Palestinians over to the United States? I'd love to hear about that.
So there's an organization called Hands of Peace, and it was based in Glenview, and each summer it would bring a cadre of a total of about 100 students, that included some Americans as well, from Israel, Palestine, over to suburban Chicago and to suburban San Diego. The program was split. Everyone was home hosted, so everyone had an American mom and dad. And the program was designed to introduce young people to each other at a very formative age, where they were able to bring their own narratives that they learned from their families, from their schools, from their media, from their societies. And they would all come with the idea of how can anyone believe anything different from what I believe. That's both from the Israeli perspective and the Palestinian perspective. And that it was going to be relatively easy to convince the other side of the truth. And what they learned through a very intensive dialogue process, which started with a lot of yelling and screaming and crying, is that there are multiple narratives and different people have different perspectives. And the goal was not to change anyone's mind, but the goal really was to help these young people make room for other narratives and to understand the differences and the difficulties. And over a course of just a few weeks, the transformation in these young people were tremendous in terms of how much they grew individually and how much they learned to listen to the others, even if they didn't agree with the other.
And that's great.
Something, by the way, Marcus, that we can use in our society as well.
You just stole the words right out of my mouth. It's not just with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's we need to listen to each other.
Absolutely.
This is just kind of an aside a little bit. Do you know what an Israeli... This is not a joke. It's true. What an Israeli says when they see an Arab on the streets?
I'm going to wait and just sit and listen to your answer.
It's not a joke. They say, look, it's your cousin. And I find that extremely fascinating because the conflict, if you go back to the Old Testament, was that Hagar was kicked out and we really are cousins. So to me, that was fantastic. I was like, oh, wow, it was one of those very cerebral moments. I don't have many of those. That was a joke.
Well, Marcus, we can spend many hours. We can do this again and focus specifically on Israel Palestine because
I would love to.
There's a ton to unpack there.
I'd absolutely love to. It's kind of a good segue because we live in this uncertain world, and some parts of the world are safe, some parts are not so safe, and there's a whole shade of gray in between. So when someone is planning a trip, and specifically we're talking overseas, how do they determine if that country or area of the world is safe to travel in?
Yeah, there's a variety of ways. I mean, first, it's not really tongue in cheek. I mean, if you find somebody who has background and experience in assessing a country, they can answer the question, because it's not always black and white. It's gray. There are certain areas, for example, in Mexico, that are absolutely fine to travel to and are safer than being in the United States. But there are areas of Mexico that you don't want to go to. So it's not a country as a monolith. It gets into specific areas and different areas. So if you find someone who has enough background and enough knowledge to assess a destination for you, yeah, that's fine. I mean, there are countries like Iceland, for example, where the entire country is fine to travel to. You're not going to have any issues in Iceland from a safety perspective in terms of like physical violence or any sort of thing. Walking into hot steaming geysers, that's a different story. But in terms of potential violence, yeah, there's a lot of countries that you're not going to have that anywhere. But there are a lot of countries where there is that nuance and that you have to be aware of. But there are tools online in terms of health and safety. You've got government tools. I know we're going to talk about that for a little bit. You've got independent tools. There's companies like International SOS and the like that will provide travel guidance on their own that is independent of any government.
My resource has always been the State Department, and I'm on their website right now as we're conversing. And some of these are super obvious. Don't go to Iran. Don't go to Iraq. It's interesting. The Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, it basically says don't travel there or increased caution. And specifically, it gives you certain miles from the northern border, which is where Lebanon is, certain miles from the Gaza West Bank and the south border with Egypt, but even though there's a pass that is perfectly fine. It says don't travel to Somalia, Syria. These are really no kidding type thing. But what surprises me is there's 4 levels of alertness, and the ones I've said are the number 4s. So where have you booked people to go to that are exotic locations?
Yeah, so I mean, you get exotic locations that are just kind of like off the beaten path that people don't think of as like normal places to go. Like currently working on a program to Sri Lanka, currently working on a program to Botswana. Those are fine to travel to. Yes, like most countries, there are things that you need to be aware of, but they're not over the top in terms of risk. There are other exotic places that you do need to be definitely more cautious about. An example of one that I booked was Ethiopia, and that's a country that will be on either the level 4 or the level 3, depending on when and where you look. But it is a country also that if there is a trusted company providing the guiding and transportation, that it's not unreasonable or unsafe to travel to, understanding that you are always going to be accepting some degree of risk. If you look at some of the ones you said, you started off with Iran and Iraq. I would not say absolutely, unlike the State Department, I would not say don't travel there. I would say if you're an American, just be, even today in Iran, be very, very cautious. So if you're working with a company, an international travel company that specializes in travel there is definitely a higher degree of risk, but it is not inherently unsafe. But you look at the flip side. I remember when I was doing business school travel, every year I would have students from India saying, hey, I want to take some of my classmates to India. Fine, that's great. Chinese student, I want to take some of my classmates to China. Fine, that's great. Nigerian student, I want to take some of my classmates to Nigeria. No, I'm not comfortable with that because I don't feel, with my background in risk management, that I can provide a safe, comfortable experience in Nigeria, even though I do know some travel providers there. So it really gets into a lot of nuance and a lot of gray area. I can share more in terms of the State Department travel warnings if you would like, Mark.
Yes, please go ahead.
Right. So, to some extent, I have always viewed that it is a mixture of generally good advice combined with politics. And the
Right.
politics, it happens regardless of who's in office. So this isn't a red or a blue statement. This is just this is the way it has been. I look at some of the ratings and I scratch my head. Like right now, Denmark is listed as a level 2, which is exercise additional caution, while Hungary, which is a state that with the current administration tends to cozy up pretty well, is listed as a level 1. Why is there a difference in terms of the travel profile to Denmark and Hungary? I personally don't see it. There are others that it's interesting when you look at that you can evaluate across country, and this is something that I think people who want to take a deeper dive into locations that they're not quite sure about should take a look at. You don't have to just look at the United States State Department. Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom all have their equivalent, and sometimes I would, especially with locations that I would say would be more on the edge of yes or no, I would look at all 4, see what the other nations are advising. So I did take a look at this morning just to see. So Denmark, the United States, has as a level 2 out of 4, which is exercise increased caution. They're not saying don't travel. They're just saying be more careful when you're there. Canada mirrors the United States, but the United Kingdom, which is the closest to Denmark, is like, yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it. They have it essentially as the level 1. I look at Egypt, because I was curious. Egypt in the United States is also, like Denmark, a level 2. It's exercise increased caution, whereas the UK has it as do not travel, effectively a level 4. So there are differences between the way different countries view the destinations, and I think people can research and look up all 4 if they just want to get a variety of opinions from different governments in different corners of the globe.
That's quite interesting. I would not have even thought of going to our allies, Canada, Australia, UK, to kind of filter out the political part. And again, I don't get into red or blue, but very fascinating to me.
I want my listeners to know that this is my dream, teaching people about safety. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for my listeners, I couldn't live my dream. So on behalf of my family and myself, I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to live my dream. And I also want to continue to live my dream, and I'm excited to continue to spread the word of safety. Recently, I began a new service as a conference keynote speaker. So if anyone would like for me to speak at future events, or if anyone knows of an introduction or would like to discuss how we can work with one another, I'd love to do just that. The keynote speaking website is www.stress2logic.com. That is STRES2logic.com. If you're aware of any conference speaking engagements where you'd like to have me speak, I'd love an introduction. You can always share my electronic business card, which is Marcus Melnick, MarcusMelnick.com. Now, back to the show.
My international travel has been limited to cruise ships, specifically the Caribbean and what's Baja? They call it the Riviera. The Riviera.
Okay.
So, I've been to Mexico a bunch of times and various islands. And as I'm looking at the list on the State Department, it says Trinidad and Tobago are level 3, which is reconsider travel. Haiti is a level 4, and these are cruise ship stops. So and you may or may not know this, how does the cruise industry work when there's these additional levels of caution required?
Right. So as you can imagine, the cruise ships have their own risk managers who assess destinations and definitely monitor things. I remember one of the first cruises I was on was a Mediterranean cruise. It was supposed to start in Istanbul, Turkey, and this was shortly after 9/11, and there was concern about Istanbul as a port, not just because of everything that happened after 9/11. The cruise line may have felt that it was safe to go there, but traveler perception was different. So the cruise line, in concert with their own risk managers, made a change and started that cruise instead in Venice, Italy, instead of Istanbul, dropping Istanbul completely. I don't know the Trinidad piece that closely. It's not a country that I have worked with. I think maybe one time I have. But I can talk to you about Haiti, because where they go in Haiti is a sheltered enclave called Labadie, which is just at the point of Haiti. It's not really Haiti. It's a point that is legally Haiti, but it's protected and completely cut off from the rest of the country. So that's kind of a asterisk on the on Haiti on a cruise itinerary.
Well, that makes me feel better. I've been there, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. One of the things that, as I'm looking at the list, I see Italy and Jamaica are both level 2s. I can see that in Jamaica because there's some crime. Not really in Italy, even though everything going to be all right. That was kind of mean. Yeah. That was just a stretch for me to be funny. That's all it was. What I'm very interested in is places like Cuba. Can people travel? Can we, as Americans, travel to Cuba?
Yes, you can travel, but there's many asterisks on that. And I think you know that I took a group to Cuba in February. There were 11 of us that headed over there. And the thing with Cuba is Americans have to travel through certain categories that are allowed by the United States. The United States, since the Castro regime took over in the late 1950s, has basically had an embargo on Cuba. It doesn't make sense to me economically. It doesn't make sense from a travel perspective. Cuba inherently is one of the safest places that I've been, because it's, number one, isolated as an island. They have very strict entry and exit. There is effectively no guns, no drugs, so you don't have that culture of violence. It is a fascinating place to visit, but you have to follow the U.S. rules, which means that you have to go for a stated purpose, and the purpose that our group had was called Support for the Cuban People, and we made sure that as we were traveling around, the money that we were spending in Cuba was not going to institutions that were Cuban government. They were going to entrepreneurs, things like bed and breakfast owners, restaurants that were privately owned that are allowed by the Cuban government, visiting artists that are independent, driving in modes of transportation for the most part that are independent of the Cuban government. So 90+% of what we did, money went into the pockets of local Cubans to supplement the meager funds that they get from the Cuban government. There are group ways that you can do it. The most popular way is to go through a synagogue or a church. Synagogues and churches have regular programs going to Cuba to learn the ways, and that's one of the categories that is allowed. Support for the Cuban People, the one that I went through, is probably the most abused. We went with a specific theme and a detailed itinerary focused on micro-entrepreneurship, which is something that is very close to my heart as a micro-entrepreneur. And we met so many different entrepreneurs there doing different things to make ends meet. It was fascinating. So we were completely legal, but it is abused. Someone checks a box and says, I'm there for support for the Cuban people. They arrive and go to the beach. That's not within the spirit or letter of the U.S. law, and they could face consequences returning to the United States.
But they could go to the beach. Just that's not the purpose of their trip. Is that correct?
You really should not be spending time at the beach. Now, we went to the beach, and we're at a beach for 15 minutes, meeting an entrepreneur who was opening a beachfront cafe and sports location. So yeah, some of our people took their shoes off and walked down to the water, but we were literally there 15 minutes. We were not go swimming in the sea or lay out on the beach or windsurf or have a drink or anything like that. It was seriously meeting people and getting a chance to experience entrepreneurship in just one other way.
What about cigars? Can you bring back cigars?
The current rule that was in place, I'd say for the past 8 years or so, is that you cannot even bring back cigars for personal consumption. So
Really?
there used to be a way you were able to bring them back for personal consumption. That has changed. That doesn't stop a lot of people from bringing it back, but if you were checked, you would be subject to heavy fining for that.
Okay. Very, very interesting.
There is no restriction on smoking Cuban cigars when you're in Cuba, though.
Right. Just like when cannabis was illegal, you could smoke it in Jamaica.
Right.
Same type of thing. So we talked about some of the international SOS, various countries equivalent to the State Department or their travel warnings. Mm-hmm. What are some other sources for travel safety that you would recommend to visit?
Yeah, I think one of the things when people are traveling international, and this one's not very well known, is something called the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, or STEP. And you can access that very easily through the State Department website. Just type in STEP and State Department, it should come right up. You can and should, especially if you're going to a destination that's not like a level 1 country, you can access STEP. You'll get information on that country, but you can also put in your particulars when you're traveling, entering and exiting, where you're going to be visiting, where you're going to be staying, your contact information. And if anything happens while you are there of note, the first thing that the embassy in that country will do, U.S. Embassy in that country will do, will be to access the STEP database and to everyone who's registered who is in country on that date, you will get a message from the U.S. Embassy advising what to do. Now, you might think that, okay, that might be something for like an Ethiopia or an Iraq or something like that. But even for a country like France, I had 2 student groups in Paris during the Charlie Hebdo terror attacks a decade plus ago, and it was essential for them to get information in terms of what to do. They were hearing from me directly in terms of shelter in place, but they were also, through the STEP program, did get notifications in terms of what to do. So it's not a bad thing, even if you're just traveling to Mexico or a Caribbean island. There's no harm in putting information in for STEP. And just make sure you put your end date, because I'm still getting notifications for Peru, where I visited 11 years ago.
I didn't know that existed. I'm really thrilled that you brought it up. I did see it on the website, but I didn't dive into it, so I'm glad that you did. Now, that's talking about area trouble, I guess you can say, or civil unrest or something like that. What does an American citizen do if they individually run into trouble with the law in another country?
Find out the answer to this question after we pause for a brief break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.